All right, so get ready because today we're diving headfirst into a topic that's going to seriously stretch your imagination. We're talking about the simulation argument. Like
Yeah.
the idea that we might actually be living inside a super, advanced computer program.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty wild, right? And our guide for this wild ride is a 2003 paper by Nick Bostrom called Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? It's not just some, sci-fi fantasy either. Bostrom actually makes a pretty compelling case, like surprisingly compelling,
Mm.
using philosophy and what we know about the future of technology.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about this paper is that it's not like Bostrom is relying on some super far-fetched concepts.
Right.
He starts with this idea of ancestor simulations.
Ancestor simulation.
So think of it this way. You have these future civilizations with, unimaginable computing power, and maybe they decide to use it to, create detailed simulations of their ancestors,
Okay, that makes sense.
which would be us.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I see where you're going with this.
We're, the virtual ancestors in some giant cosmic history project.
That's a cool way to put it. But why would they even be able to create something that seems so real? I mean, our brains are unbelievably complex.
That's where substrate independence comes in.
Substrate independent.
Yeah, so it's this idea that consciousness isn't tied to, a specific physical material, like our brains. What really matters is the information processing that's happening, the computations.
So not the meat, but the motion.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So if a future civilization could perfectly replicate those processes, right, then theoretically they could, generate those conscious experiences, but inside a computer.
Oh, okay. So they wouldn't need to rebuild every neuron and synapse.
Yeah.
Just the overall patterns of how our minds work.
Exactly.
Correct.
And to really, drive this point home, Bostrom looks at the potential computing power that these future civilizations might have, and he sticks to what we know about physics and nanotechnology.
So no magic involved.
No magic, right? Even with those, conservative estimates, he suggests that a computer the size of a planet could run tons of these ancestor simulations simultaneously.
A computer the size of a planet running countless ancestor simulations.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, it's hard to even imagine that sheer scale of computing power. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around how this leads to the conclusion that we are probably in a simulation right now.
Okay, so that's the core of the simulation argument, right?
Sure.
Bostrom is basically saying that if future civilizations can run these simulations, and if even, a small percentage of them actually do, then the number of simulated minds would just completely outnumber the real ones.
So just by pure probability, it's more likely that we're one of the many simulated minds rather than one of the few original ones?
Precisely. And he uses this concept called the bland indifference principle to illustrate this.
The bland indifference principle.
Yeah. Okay, so imagine you have two bags of marbles, right?
Okay.
One has 100 marbles and the other has 1,000,000 marbles. And both bags have the same proportion of red marbles.
Got it.
So if you pick a random marble, without knowing which bag it came from, it's obviously more likely to be from the bag with 1,000,000 marbles, right?
That's right.
So it's the same with simulated minds. If there are way more simulated minds than real ones, then you're more likely to be a simulated mind.
Yeah, that analogy really helps.
Yeah.
The probability aspect makes much more sense now. But even if we accept that, there's still the possibility that we reach that, advanced stage and we just decide not to make these ancestor simulations.
And that is actually one of the three possibilities that Bostrom outlines. He says that one of these must be true.
Okay, lay it on me. What's number one?
Number one is that humanity goes extinct before reaching that, post-human stage, meaning we never reach that level of technology.
All right, so that's a pretty bleak outlook.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you think about all of the existential threats that we're facing right now.
Totally.
Things like, runaway nanotechnology, which Bostrom even mentions in the paper, or even unintended consequences of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
It's a real reminder of how fragile civilizations can be. Okay, so possibility number one is we basically wipe ourselves out before we're even capable of making simulations. What's number two?
Number two is that even if we do reach that post-human stage, civilizations just have no interest in running ancestor simulations.
Oh, so even if we could, we just wouldn't. That's interesting. What would it even mean about their motivations and values if they had absolutely zero desire to look back at their own past?
Yeah, what would it mean?
Would their goals and desires be so different from ours that recreating us would just hold no value for them? And what would it mean for a civilization to completely sever its connection to its own origins?
That's a great question.
It's a fascinating question to think about.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got extinction and a lack of interest. What's the third possibility?
The third possibility, the one that's really going to make your head spin, is that we are living in a simulation right now.
Okay, so we are living in a simulation.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that our reality is fake or meaningless, right?
Oh.
I mean, our experiences, our joys, our struggles, they're all real to us, regardless of whether they're happening in biological brains or simulated ones.
So it's less about like whether our reality is real in
Yeah.
some, ultimate sense, and more about the nature of that reality, the framework that it exists within.
Exactly.
So if we are in a simulation, it raises a whole bunch of other questions, like could our simulators themselves be simulated?
Right.
Is there a whole chain of like nested realities, each one a simulation within a larger simulation?
Well, that's getting pretty meta.
Yeah, I know. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's take a closer look at what each of these three possibilities actually means for our understanding of, the universe and ourselves. So first up, let's unpack this whole extinction thing.
If humanity doesn't make it, to that post-human stage, it really raises some questions about the future of intelligent life.
Right.
Like, are there just, like, inherent dangers in technological progress?
Mhm.
Is self-destruction just, baked into the very idea of an advanced civilization?
It's kind of like that saying, we're either going to be visited by aliens or we're going to destroy ourselves first,
Right.
Because if we can imagine doing it, someone else has probably already done it.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought. But what if we do manage to, survive
Right.
and become capable of creating these incredibly detailed simulations?
Okay.
Bostrom really spends some time talking about the practicalities of all of it, like the sheer amount of computing power needed to simulate a universe.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it would have to be a ridiculous amount of processing power to like recreate every atom and subatomic particle. Just thinking about it makes my head spin.
It would be astronomical, but Bostrom points out that you wouldn't need to simulate everything down to that, quantum level
Oh, okay.
to create a convincing experience.
So it's kind of like in video games where only the areas you're looking at are rendered in high detail and everything else is just like a basic model until you get closer.
Exactly. The
Okay.
simulation could just, focus its resources on where the simulated beings are actually interacting with their environment.
Makes sense.
Like the inner workings of a planet or the vast stretches of empty space, those could be simplified until someone actually starts investigating them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like a super sophisticated stage set,
Right.
only revealing what needs to be seen at any given moment. But what about technology?
Okay.
I mean, our computers are constantly like probing the microscopic world.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that require incredibly detailed simulations even within the larger simulation?
That's a really great point, and Bostrom actually addresses this directly. He argues that our current computing power is, nothing compared to what a post-human civilization could achieve. Like, simulating our computers even down to the level of individual circuits would be like child's play to them.
So they could basically run our entire like digital world
Mm-hmm.
within their simulation without breaking a sweat. That's crazy.
It is.
I mean, it's kind of wild to think about.
And it also raises some, interesting possibilities.
Like what?
Could they manipulate our technology,
Oh.
introduce glitches,
Uh-huh.
or even feed us specific information?
It starts to blur the lines between just like a simulation and something, I don't know, something way more intentional.
Right.
Okay, now we're getting a little creepy. But for now, let's just assume that they're not actively messing with us, right?
Okay.
Even so, why even bother creating these simulations in the first place? Like, what's the motivation?
Bostrom suggests a few possibilities.
Okay.
One is just scientific curiosity, like a desire to study the evolution of their species, maybe explore different historical paths, or even just, test hypotheses about how societies develop.
So like those what if scenarios that historians love to debate, right?
Exactly.
Like, what if Rome never fell?
Mhm.
Or, what if the Black Death had never happened? A
Mhm.
simulation could let them actually play out all of those, alternative timelines.
Precisely. Or maybe it's driven by this sense of nostalgia,
Right.
like a longing to reconnect with their past or, experience a simpler time.
It's like building an incredibly elaborate family tree, but instead of just names and dates, you have like entire simulated lives unfolding before you.
Right.
Like a, I don't know, like a digital ancestry project on a cosmic scale.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thanks.
And of course, there's always the possibility of, entertainment.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Maybe these simulations are like the ultimate virtual reality experience for post-humans.
Okay, so instead of just putting on like a VR headset and playing a game,
Mhm.
they're stepping into a fully realized historical simulation,
Yeah.
experiencing life as, I don't know, like a Roman emperor or a medieval peasant.
Yeah, why not?
That's like next level immersive entertainment.
The possibilities are kind of endless, right?
Yeah.
And that's what makes the simulation hypothesis so captivating. It just opens up this huge realm of speculation about the motivations and capabilities of civilizations way beyond our own.
And it forces us to think about what we would do with that kind of power. I mean, would we resist the temptation to, play God,
Yeah.
to intervene in our creation's lives? Or would we be drawn in by, that allure of control, the ability to shape destinies?
It's a question worth pondering. But even if our simulators have chosen, a hands-off approach, there's another layer of complexity to consider.
Okay, hit me.
The concept of nested simulations.
Okay, now this is where it really starts to feel like we're falling down the rabbit hole.
Right,
Nested
right.
simulations.
Exactly. So what if those simulated civilizations within their simulated reality advance to the point where they can create their own ancestor simulations?
Oh, wow.
It's like those Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah.
Simulations within simulations within simulations with like no theoretical limit to how many layers there could be.
So we could be in a simulation created by beings who are themselves in a simulation, created by beings, and so on, like forever. That's, whoa.
That's a lot.
It really is. But, Bostrom does point out that there might be practical limits to how many layers deep those simulations can go.
Oh, right. Okay.
I mean, the computational resources required to run all of those nested simulations would be enormous.
Yeah, true. Even for a post-human civilization.
For sure.
So there's a chance our simulation could just get, like, shut down before we even reach the point of creating our own. That's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, it is a possibility. Or maybe our simulators have found ways to, like, optimize their simulations, right?
To reduce that computational load without sacrificing realism. Like maybe they've discovered shortcuts that we can't even fathom.
Yeah, I mean, we are limited by, our current understanding of what's even possible. But let's shift gears for a second because something's been on my mind.
Okay.
If we are in a simulation, what does that mean for our understanding of free will?
That's a good question.
Like, if our actions are just predetermined lines of code, do we really have any choice in what we do?
That's a question that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
Right.
And the simulation hypothesis just adds a whole other, layer of complexity to it.
It definitely challenges our intuitive sense of agency, right?
Right.
That feeling that we are the authors of our own lives.
Right.
Like, if our thoughts and decisions are ultimately determined by, I don't know, algorithms, does that make us nothing more than puppets in some, like, cosmic play?
It's definitely a disturbing thought.
Yeah.
But even if we are living in like a deterministic system, right?
Okay.
Where our actions are predetermined,
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that our experiences are any less, real or meaningful. Our joys, our sorrows, our loves, our losses, these are all part of the human experience, regardless of whether they're orchestrated by a simulator or not.
It's a subtle distinction, but it's important. I guess it's kind of like those characters in a book or a movie.
Right.
Even though their actions are predetermined by the author or the director, we still, find ourselves emotionally invested in their stories.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe our simulators have programmed in a certain, degree of randomness or unpredictability,
Okay.
allowing for like genuine free will, but within the confines of the simulation.
So we might have more agency than we realize.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, that's a little bit more hopeful. But even if we accept that our experiences are real and that we have, at least some degree of free will, there's still this, like, looming question of purpose.
Right.
Like, if we're just characters in someone else's simulation, what is the point of it all? Why are we here?
That's the ultimate existential question, isn't it? And the simulation hypothesis doesn't really offer any, easy answers.
Right.
But it does force us to confront this possibility that our purpose might not be what we traditionally thought it was.
Okay.
Maybe our purpose isn't to, fulfill some grand cosmic plan, but simply to live our lives to the fullest, to experience the full range of human emotions, and to, learn and grow along the way.
So rather than seeking a purpose that's imposed from the outside, we create our own meaning through our choices and actions,
Yeah.
even within the, constraints of the simulation.
Precisely. It's a shift in perspective, a reframing of the quantum of purpose. And perhaps that's one of the, unintended consequences of the simulation hypothesis. It forces us to, like, re-examine our assumptions about the world and our place in it.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own existence,
Right.
questioning everything we thought we knew about reality, free will, the meaning of life, the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's both unsettling and liberating at the same time.
It's a journey into the unknown, a quest for understanding that might ultimately lead us back to ourselves.
I think that's a perfect place to stop for this part of our deep dive.
That is good.
But we're not finished yet. There's still so much more to explore.
Oh, yeah.
Join us for the final part, where we'll delve even deeper into the implications of the simulation argument for our understanding of the universe, the nature of consciousness, and the future of humanity itself. Welcome back to our deep dive into the simulation argument. We've gone from the basics of ancestor simulations to, whoa, the possibility of nested realities. I feel like we've fallen through the looking glass at this point.
Yeah, and just when you think we've hit peak weirdness, there's one more twist to think about.
Oh no. What now?
Remember how we talked about the idea that our simulators might not just be passive observers, right?
Yeah.
Like they could actually be actively intervening in our simulated world.
Okay, so not just creating the simulation, but actually messing with what happens inside of it. I don't know, that's a whole other level of creepy.
Right. But it's important to approach this idea with a healthy dose of skepticism. Even Bostrom himself says that we don't have any actual evidence of these interventions. Just because they could doesn't mean they are.
That's a good point. It's like those conspiracy theories where every coincidence is proof of some grand scheme. We've got to be careful not to jump to conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get carried away, right? Let our imaginations run wild.
Oh, totally.
But if we really want to take this seriously, we need to stick to, logical reasoning and evidence-based speculation. So, back to those hypothetical interventions. If our simulators actually were, pulling the strings, what would that even look like? Would it be subtle? Would they be making, big, obvious changes?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, it really depends on their motivations and, their tech level.
Okay.
Maybe they're making small adjustments to kind of guide our development, like a cosmic gardener or something.
Yeah. Or maybe they're running experiments, tweaking things to see how we react,
Oh, so like those psychology studies where they manipulate variables to see how people behave.
Yeah, except in this case, the experiment is our entire reality.
Whoa, that's intense. This whole discussion is making me think about all those classic sci-fi stories about simulated worlds,
Yeah.
Like The Matrix or Star Trek's holodeck where you can't even tell what's real anymore.
Yeah, it's a popular theme. And I think it's because those stories tap into this deep-seated fear that maybe we're just pawns in some larger game.
Right, right. But even if we put those fears aside and we try to be rational about it, it's hard to ignore the philosophical implications of a reality where, someone else could be changing things whenever they want.
Yeah, I mean, it raises some big questions about free will, morality, even the meaning of life. If our actions are all decided by a simulator, does it even make sense to talk about good and evil?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's like a cosmic version of that whole nature versus nurture thing. If our choices are predetermined by the simulation, are we really responsible for our actions? It's a lot to think about.
It is. But even in a simulated reality, our choices still have consequences, right?
Right.
They affect our experiences, our relationships, the world around us.
So even if we're just lines of code, our actions still matter, within the context of the simulation.
Exactly. Our choices, relationships, experiences, those are all real to us, even if they are just happening inside a computer program.
That's like those characters in a book or a video game.
Right.
Even though their actions are decided by the author or programmer, within the world of the story, it all still matters.
Exactly. And it's important, right? It lets us keep a sense of agency and purpose, even if we are in a simulation.
This actually reminds me of something we talked about before, the problem of evil.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that suffering might be an illusion, something programmed into the simulation.
Right. Right. It's a controversial idea, but it is interesting. If our simulators have the power to create our reality, then they also have the power to decide the rules, including whether there's suffering.
But why would they do that? Why would they intentionally create a world with so much pain and suffering, even if it's just a simulation? It seems cruel.
We can only guess, right? But maybe they believe that suffering is necessary for growth,
Yeah.
like for moral development or to make us appreciate the good things.
It's like those parents who let their kids fall down and scrape their knees so they can learn to be careful.
Yeah, a little tough love. Or maybe they're just fascinated by our ability to bounce back, how we find meaning and purpose even in the face of adversity.
It's kind of unsettling, you know?
Hmm.
Makes me feel like we're just, I don't know, lab rats in some big experiment.
Yeah, it's a possibility. But it's also possible they have good intentions, right?
Oh,
Maybe they're trying to create the most realistic simulation possible, and that means including all of human experience, both the good and the bad.
so even our suffering has a purpose. Like it has a function within the simulation. That's a hard pill to swallow.
It is. It's not a comfortable thought, but it's one possible explanation for why there is evil in a world that's supposedly created by intelligent beings.
It's a lot to take in. I have to say, even if the simulation argument is wrong, I think it's valuable because it makes us think about some of the biggest questions we face.
Totally.
Questions about reality, consciousness, free will, purpose. These are things we think about anyway, whether we're in a simulation or not.
Absolutely. And that's what I think makes this so fascinating. It's not about finding the right answers. It's about challenging what we think we know and considering new possibilities.
It's a philosophical thought experiment,
Mm.
but on a massive scale. It makes us question everything.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll be able to test this, right? Maybe we'll find real proof that confirms or disproves it.
Right.
But until then, it's an idea that really gets you thinking. It makes you reflect on the nature of reality, what it means to be human, all of that.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive. And my mind is officially blown. We've covered so much, it's crazy. From ancestor simulations, to the idea that our creators could be watching us, to the meaning of life, the whole thing.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. But I think it's been worth it. Even if we never know for sure whether we're living in a simulation, the whole journey of thinking about it has been, eye-opening. It's made us think critically and challenge our own assumptions and, I don't know, embrace the unknown.
And that's what makes this so compelling. It reminds us that the universe is full of mysteries. And what we think we know about reality is always changing.
It's true. We'll leave you to ponder the implications of all this. Until next time, keep searching for knowledge and never stop questioning the nature of reality.